This is the LatinNews Podcast. I'm your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia. This week, we'll be discussing issues taking place in Panama. Our very special guest is Carlos Guevara-Mann. He's the professor of political science, the director of Master of Science in International Affairs at Florida State University in the Republic of Panama, and he's the president of a civic and cultural association named the Sociedad Bolivariana de Panama. Professor, welcome on the LatinNews Podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Richard, and very pleased to be with you.
Well, it's an interesting time in Panama. It's always an interesting time in Panama. Of course, we did have an episode last year when we talked to a professor of international business, Andrew Thomas, but we were talking business, the canal. But this time, we can discuss something more. We have elections in Panama on the 5th of May, and this is all taking place under, I would say, the cloud of former President Ricardo Martinelli. Perhaps you could give us some background.
Well, there's 8 candidates in the presidential election. That might be probably the most relevant, or maybe the most important piece of information for your viewers, right? So there's 8 candidates. This is a multi-party system. Parties do not mean much in Panamanian politics. They're mostly clientelistic, personalistic devices. And the term is 5 years, right? So every 5 years we have elections, and we've had elections normally, since Panama transitioned to democracy in 1989, 1994. Your viewers may recall that in 1989, there was an invasion, a U.S. invasion in Panama, and the military regime that was in place was removed from power. Panama transitioned to democracy in that period, 1989 to 1994. And since 94, we've had elections every 5 years as prescribed by the Constitution, right? So one of the characteristics of Panamanian politics is that the government has never won an election in the democratic period. And this is quite different from other countries in Latin America. I think in fact Panama is the only country with a minimally functioning party system, right? There are countries that don't have a functioning party system, right? So that's why I emphasize with a minimally functioning party system that has never re-elected the government. Of course, there's no re-election for the president. The president needs to wait 2 terms before seeking office again. And the government party has never been re-elected consecutively during the democratic regime, right? So that is one of the characteristics of the Panamanian political system. There is real alternation of power in Panama, very, very real alternation of power. At least up to this point, that has been the situation. And you asked about the shadow of former President Martinelli. Well, the comment about a president not being able to seek re-election is relevant in this connection because Martinelli was the president before, in 2009 to 2014. So he would not have been able to be a candidate in 2014. He would not have been able to be a candidate in 2019, but he would have been able to be a candidate in 2024, that is this time, and he was actually nominated as a candidate by his party, but the judiciary, Panama's judiciary, ruled against him in a money laundering scheme, in a money laundering case in which he was found guilty. So based on that ruling, despite the fact that he had been nominated as a candidate and he had been accepted by the electoral authority, he was barred from being a candidate in the elections on account of this ruling from the Supreme Court, from the judiciary, rather, not the Supreme Court, from the judiciary.
So this is, there was this this case. It's a new business case, as you said, corruption case, and he received a sentence of 10 years and 8 months. Of course, and now, if I'm not mistaken, he's taken asylum in the Nicaraguan embassy.
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. So crazy moments in politics from the region, and his, well, I would say, an important politician who has held various high-ranking positions in the government of Martinelli is Jose Raul Mulino. Is he the front runner right now for the elections?
According to most polls, yes. According to all polls, yes, he is the front runner.
Okay, so you've got this man, Jose Raul Mulino. Is he likely to be, let's say, a puppet figure for Martinelli? There's a benefit, obviously, to Martinelli if Mulino wins the elections?
Well, I do not think he's likely to be a puppet, but that's something that that's very difficult to forecast, right? But I don't think he's likely to be a puppet, because that doesn't seem to be his personality. He is somebody who is certainly aligned with Martinelli. Otherwise, Martinelli would not have chosen him as a vice presidential candidate, right? So he's obviously aligned with Martinelli, but the impression that he gives and his performance as a minister, he's been twice a minister. So he was first a foreign minister. He was first a vice minister and then a foreign minister. And subsequently he was a minister for security. So the performance he can show as a minister reveals that he has his own personality, and somebody who is capable of taking his own decisions, right?
Okay. Well, and you said there's 8 candidates coming up, and I know that Torrijos, so the son of the former, I would say, military president, is running. Who else? What does this field look like?
Right. So let me clarify. So Omar Torrijos was never a president. He was a military dictator, and he actually never assumed the office of president. He would always have stooges, or what we call them puppet presidents. But he remained in charge of the National Guard, which used to be the country's armed force, right? So as a dictator, he was in power between 1968 and 1981, when he died in a mysterious plane crash. And subsequently, the military dictatorship continued, notoriously under somebody called Noriega, whom many of your viewers might recognize as being an obnoxious presence in Panamanian politics, right? So Torrijos' son, Martin Torrijos, was a president before. Of course, he ran for the party created by the military dictatorship, which ironically has been the main beneficiary of Panama's democracy, right? This is one of the ironies of the transitions to democracy. Sometimes we have transitions to democracy in which dictatorial parties are removed from power, and other times we have transitions to democracy in which dictatorial parties actually manage to continue operating and benefiting from the system, and that is the case of Panama. So Martin Torrijos, who's the name of the current candidate, who was a president before, ran the country from 2004 to 2009, just before Martinelli. Martin Torrijos, when he ran for office in 2004, was a candidate, PRD, which, as I said, was the party created by the military regime. This time, very opportunistically, because he wasn't nominated as the party candidate, Martin Torrijos left the party and has become a candidate of the Partido Popular. Partido Popular is what is left of the Christian Democratic Party. Christian democracy has declined significantly everywhere, and Panama is no exception. It used to be ideological, a respected party. Now it is another of Panama's clientelist parties. And in an effort to maybe gain more votes than they would have received had they nominated somebody else. They sought Martín Torrijos and nominated him as a candidate of Partido Popular to the presidency. So again, what Torrijos did was leave his own party, PRD, and accept nomination by Partido Popular. But in essence, he remains not just a PRD figure. His roots are in PRD, and his identity is closely connected to the military regime.
Mm-hmm. And out of the others, are there? I mean, is there anyone that could strike up, let's say, get into a coalition, or they're all running on their own bills? Everyone's throwing everything at this election behind, obviously, second place and beyond behind Mulino.
Well, the thing is that the electoral system in Panama is quite inflexible when it comes to the possibility of forging alliances at close to election time, right? So whilst in other countries it could be possible for candidates to coalesce together, to align, to create alliances close to the election, that is not a possibility in Panama. So the term for that, or the period for that, ended sometime last year, in September, October of last year. So the candidacies were firmly in place by the end of October 2023, which I think is something really terrible, because there should be shall we say, a wider window for this type of alliances to be possible. But anyway, that's not the case, right? So each one of the 8 candidates is standing on their own. There were alliances created before, but they were firmly in place by, they were declared to be firmly in place by October of 2023, and no further or no additional alliances were possible beyond that date, right? And there's a very important characteristic, Richard, of Panama's elections, and this is that not only are alliances not a possibility very close to the election period, six months, I think, is the limit before the elections, but also it is a first past the post election, and this is different from many countries, in fact from most countries in Latin America, because most of them, I think it's 13 of them by my last count. If it's not 13, it's close to that figure. 13 of the 20 Latin American republics have a second round or a runoff election, right? In case the president doesn't get a substantial majority. In some countries, it is 50% plus one. In other countries, such as Costa Rica, it is 40%, right? So there needs to be a majority, either a significant majority or an absolute majority. That's not the case in Panama. In Panama, whoever gets, and this is what actually happens, whoever gets the largest minority of the vote becomes a president, and there is no runoff. So Panamanian presidents are normally elected with less than 50% of the vote. The only time in democracy when the president got more than 50% was in 2009 when Martinelli was elected. He got 60%, right? But before that, in 94, PRD got 33%. Last time, 2019, PRD, with an ally, got 33%. So these are presidents who come to office without much popular support, right? And because the term is so long, it's a 5-year term, the potential or the opportunity for losing support is quite significant, quite great. So by the middle or end of their terms, presidents are really despised by the population, right? So these are features to take into account when considering elections in Panama.
I find it staggering that you could win the election with 30%. But so when presidents are despised, as you say, at the end of their 5-year term, well, let's cast a light on the current or the outgoing president, Laurentino Cortizo. He is currently despised by the whole population, or he's he's sitting pretty as the outgoing president.
Well, let me put it diplomatically. About 90% of the population do not approve of his government. So the last, let me say, not last, the most recent approval rating I saw was 11%. Of course, all of these are opinion polls, and well, not all of them are entirely reliable, but it is certain that Laurentino Cortizo does not enjoy support among the Panamanian populace, right? So the government is widely perceived as being ineffective, being corrupt, and most people want it to end, right? So this is something that is bound to happen when a president is elected with a very low popular vote on the one hand, when the term is very long, and when there are no controls in place to mitigate the inevitable tendency towards tyranny and despotism, which seems to involve Latin American presidents and rulers and people who seek office in this part of the world.
On that subject, I mean, this sort of slide to sort of despotic behavior. Let's look at the protests that occurred in 2023 in Panama, obviously largely against this copper mine. That's right, the copper mine. I mean, how did Cortizo respond to this? Because everything was a perfect storm at that moment in Panama. There's a drought, so no water in the canal, affecting shipping. Obviously, ships and freighters looking for other routes, going to the long route round because of the Panama's lack of water, the canal's lack of water. The idea of creating this mine and diverting rivers for the mine, of course, rivers that would ordinarily, I believe, feed into the canal as well, and then people not wanting the mine, but Cortizo was stubborn. I mean, I would say there was a slide towards an authoritarian behavior from Cortizo, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, to begin with, the mine had been going on for a long time, right? So it wasn't Cortizo who initiated the mine. But the mine was operating in a sort of a limbo because the Supreme Court had declared that the contract was unconstitutional. So what should have happened when the court declared the contract to be unusual is for the mining operation to stop. But then the government, and it wasn't only this government, the previous government as well, what they were doing was trying to create a new contract that would be legal, that would be acceptable. At least in theory, that is what they were trying to do. Now, in practice, the contract was perceived to be right. So the way people saw it, the government was selling out the country to the mining operation. So they were being given very, very broad concessions, including, as you mentioned, access to water, access to fresh water, including a very, very, very large tract of land, including the airspace above the mine, which resonated very badly with Panamanians. And in this context, we need to bear in mind that Panama was a country that was subject to well, I think we could fairly say U.S. domination during a large part of the 20th century. So there is a legacy of, shall we say, anti-colonialism or an anti-colonialist attitude in Panama. on account of this very, very prolonged period of U.S. presence and U.S. domination in the Canal Zone, and even beyond the Canal Zone in Panama and in the Panamanian government. So, going back to 1903, Panama was forced at the time when it seceded from Colombia. Panama was forced at the time to give enormous concessions to the United States, which were considered from the beginning to be detrimental to Panama's sovereignty. Okay, so this is something going back many years. The mining contract that the government negotiated resonated with that. So we need to look into the collective subconscious, the collective Panamanian subconscious, and remember that there's this background of a struggle to assert national sovereignty that included most of the 20th century, right? On the one hand. On the other hand, like I said before, was also a very high perception of government corruption, right? So people do not trust the government. People do not trust anything having to do with the public sector. And the sense was, so they're selling out the country for a bribe. That was the sense, right? There were some environmental concerns. I wouldn't say that they were dominating. I think there were some people who were genuinely concerned for the environment, but the main concern and the main trigger for the protests, I think, was the perception that the government was selling the country's resources in exchange for private benefits for government officials who participated in the contracting procedure, right? And so it was very lamentable for people saw it as something very, very reprehensible, right? Not beyond lamentable, it was reprehensible. People thought it was reprehensible that the government negotiated the final version so quickly, sent it to the National Assembly. They approved it in 3 consecutive readings according to the Constitution, right? All bills need to go through 3 readings, but the 3 readings were held one day after the other, right? So there was a 24-hour difference, and then the last reading, after the last reading happened, the president signed it immediately, according to the Constitution as well. The president needs to sign on any bill. It received the Comptroller General's office a approval as well immediately, and it was even published that day in the official newspaper. All of these, of course, are requirements for a contract to enter into force. So when people realized what was happening and the velocity with which nothing happens that quickly in Panama, right? Nothing happens that quickly. When people realized what was going on, when people started looking into the contract and seeing all the concessions that were being given to the mining company, and when suspicions circulated that there have been hefty bribes, people became very incensed, and this triggered a large wave of protests, as you know, because you were here at the time and you were able to ascertain what was going on. What was the government's attitude? And the government kept silent and wouldn't do anything. I think they were paralyzed. I think that they didn't really expect that anything like this would happen, and they didn't know what to do. I think they certainly wanted to go on with the contract. Initially, they may have tried to find a way to make it digestible to the public, but when they realized that this was not a possibility, that the public were adamant that the contract had to be rescinded, then they just pretty much froze, and the country was paralyzed with protests and disturbances and problems of all sorts, and the government was leaderless pretty much. So eventually it came to the Supreme Court that the contract was unconstitutional, and they did so. They found 25 reasons in the contract that pointed to the unconstitutionality of the deal, and that seemed to at least sort out that situation at the moment. But then there were economic consequences, and we're going through those economic consequences at the moment.
And these economic consequences, perhaps you could yes, expound on these.
Well, the mining company was as we know, extracting copper. It was a copper mine, chiefly copper, but there was some gold as well and other minerals. And this was these minerals were extracted and shipped especially to China, and part of it, a smaller part, to other countries in the Far East, but especially to China. So this was a mine. This was a mine that was created to satisfy the unending Chinese appetite for minerals, right? So it is interesting and relevant to place it within this broader context, right? So because the operation was apparently so successful, the mine was contributing a significant proportion or a significant percentage of Panama's gross domestic product for a couple of years, right? Not that long, but since it started operating, copper became Panama's main export, right? And there's the allegation, or there's the view rather than an allegation. There's the view that this didn't really benefit Panama because the proceeds were going to an international company that didn't have any real presence, and well, except for the mining outfit, right? But the profits didn't come to Panama. The government receipts were very low from the copper operation, but there was a significant investment, right? A significant physical investment, and there were many jobs that were created, and people, a couple thousand people that were getting payments and salaries and benefits from this company, right? So there was an impact. There was an impact on the Panamanian economy, and that ceased, right? Yeah. So the real challenge to Panama is to replace that income with, first of all, an operation or a set of operations that are, like I said, first of all, transparent, right? Corruption-free to begin with. Second of all, environmentally friendly, or at least not directly deleterious to the environment, right? And also something that creates wealth and produces wealth for the community. That would be ideal. Now, we seem to lack creativity. Our leadership seems to lack creativity and a sense of community in order to bring about these results. But that obviously is what is needed, and that is obviously what the people want. They didn't want a contract that was perceived to be a sellout. They wanted a deal that was beneficial to the people and to the country as a whole. So this remains a challenge today, right?
Definitely so, and of course, resulted, I suppose, it's a consequence is the reduction of Fitch ratings to Panama, and then, I mean, because we look at all these things happening at the same time, the ongoing drought, of course, yes, affecting the canal, and yes, and of course, the receipts for ships coming through has not been that great. It's about, I mean, I think it's half the normal number are going through per day. Is that right?
Not that much, and actually the income has not gone down that significantly because, of course, the prices have gone up. Yeah. It hasn't been exactly halved. It's been a bit less than that, and now they're slowly returning to normalcy, right? But it is a great worry. It is a great worry because there wasn't enough water to run ships normally through the canal, and the Panama Canal is Panama's emblem. That is the symbol of Panama throughout the world. So even if income hasn't gone down that significantly, it is a matter of worry and concern to Panamanians that their emblem everywhere is going through such difficulties. So obviously, there's global warming uh, to blame for a significant part of the situation, but then there's also other issues that need to be dealt with and haven't been dealt with, including water supply for the canal. It is evident and obvious that there needs that we need to increase water supply. That means bringing water from other rivers, because the canal, this is important for your listeners to be aware of. The canal runs with fresh water. This is not a sea level canal like the Suez Canal in Egypt. This is a lock canal, which means that ships are elevated over the mountain range, Panama's mountain range, on a set of locks, which are like elevators, right? And the canal runs on fresh water, right? So we need an important fresh water supply. And the widening of the canal, which was completed in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, the widening of the canal, meaning that a new lane of locks was added, that widening has increased use of water by the canal. And the problem is that even as use of water has increased, water supply has not. It has not, because other sources have not been put into operation. It has not because rain levels, even though Panama is a country where it rains a lot, rain levels have decreased. There's added problems, including deforestation, fires, and so on and so forth, that have decreased water availability for the canal. So all these problems need to be tackled, and we need intelligent, resourceful, shall we say, patriotic leadership in order to deal with these problems, and we certainly haven't had that in recent years. So that is a big problem, and as I said before, it hasn't been that significant in terms of the income, but it is worrisome, because if the problem is not dealt with effectively, this will recur. It'll continue occurring, and it'll be more serious, and it'll be drier, and there'll be less water in the future unless we take care of this situation now. So that's a cause of concern for Panamanians. I would say, you mentioned the ratings,
Yes.
and it wasn't only Fitch. There were other ones as well, which downgraded Panama, Panama's rating, overall rating, right, the country rating. So part of it was based on the mining issue, but also on the fiscal management, the government's fiscal management. So very low tax returns, very low tax income, faced with a swelling of the public sector. So we have something like 280,000 public employees, which in a country of 4.5 million people is a huge amount. Most of them don't have a real job. Many of them are sinecures. Many of them have been appointed in order to pay political favors. We have a very, very serious problem with the pension system. It is called the Social Security Administration in Panama, and this pension program is running on a deficit, and there's the very real possibility that there will be no funds to pay the pensions. So the government is going to have to step in and find resources. I don't know from where, because it doesn't really have resources, right? But find resources in order to save the pension system from collapsing. The levels of indebtedness have increased way beyond anything that is manageable or reasonable. So it's been like $20 billion over a 4-year period, which is extremely significant for Panama. So when this government stepped in, it was something like 27 billion dollars in foreign debt, in not foreign, in debt, in government debt, in public sector debt. It's now gone up to about 47 billion. There's nothing to show for that debt. There are reasons of concern. Panama's infrastructure has deteriorated significantly. There have been no serious investments in infrastructure, in roads, in other public facilities. So really, the situation gives cause for concern, and I think that plays into the downgrading by the rating agencies that we experienced a couple of weeks ago.
This sort of feathers into where I wanted to go as well with this conversation. So very interesting. Now, you used the word in a couple of occasions, the need for creativity from our politicians, or from Panama's politicians, regarding the issues of the mine, regarding the issues of the pension funds, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of appropriate or effective water management. Do you think that Jose Raul Mulino is that creative politician who can oversee and perhaps tackle some of these issues? And of course, the last and final issue, that of migration, because of course we're looking at, I can't even remember the ridiculous amount of people who crossed up through the Darien Gap last year, and we're already on course to break the record this year if numbers continue. Is Mulino, as we say, the polls point towards him as winning. Is he the creative president that Panama needs?
Well, let me just point or clarify that the number last year was 500,000. Okay, so it was 500,000 irregular immigrants who crossed the Darien Gap, and that is a terrible crossing. Not only is it a terrible crossing, it is a crossing in the hands of organized crime syndicates who operate in Colombia and charge people large sums for pretty much abandoning them in the jungle, right? Crossing them over to the Panamanian side and abandoning them in the jungle. It really is a hideous situation, and something that, well, the problem originates in the sending countries, right? The main sending country is Venezuela, which, as we know, is a terrible dictatorship, a dictatorship that has created a major exodus, almost nearing 8 million people, right? It's about a quarter of the Venezuelan population has left. And there's also immigrants from Haiti and from Ecuador these days, other countries as well, Cuba, even China and countries in the Far East are using this crossing, but especially Venezuelans, right? So the problem originates in these countries, which have terrible conditions, and then the illegal crossings are facilitated in Colombia, and the Colombian government is agreeable to all this situation, because this is a human trafficking business that occurs in Colombia with the acquiescence of the Colombian government, and Panama is being affected by this situation. So the question directly was on Jose Raul Mulino's qualifications, and that's always a very difficult issue to respond to. So I would say that based on his background, he's been a cabinet secretary twice before, right? So based on his background, he has cognizance and knowledge of the problems, and he's certainly not a newcomer, and certainly not somebody who would be confronted with government decision making for the first time. So on that account, one would expect that he has a baggage, an intellectual and baggage and experience to rely on in order to make ideally good decisions for the country. But the country is really what perhaps one would like to emphasize is that the country is going through a challenging, the country's going through challenging times, right? We mentioned some of those challenges: the drop in GDP, the loss in investment grade rating, the pension system, this terrible problem of irregular immigration. So can you imagine 500,000 people coming to Panama? This is a country of 4.5 million people. That's more than 10% of the population. Of course, most of them move on, right? Most of them move on, but it really is a very, very, very serious situation that is going on in Darien and throughout the country. Panama really has no capacity to deal with this huge issue, and the places where this problem originates are washing their hands at a situation that is causing a great damage in countries such as Panama and other countries as well, along the way to the United States, but especially Panama. So the Darien camps are overwhelmed with migrants, and these are only a couple of issues that we've mentioned before. There's other situations that need tackling. Education has deteriorated significantly, so there needs to be an overhaul in public education, in access to health as well. There needs to be an improvement in access to health. We mentioned infrastructure before, which was pretty much abandoned during this government. So certainly whoever leads the country will need to resort to as much intellectual capacity and creativity as he or she, there's two women candidates, might be able to garner.
It's going to be a trying time, and we can only hope for the best, and that the best candidate or the most able candidate wins, as you say, wins the minority to get in that fascinating electoral setup that Panama has. Let me take this moment to say thank you so much for sharing so unselfishly, really a bottomless knowledge of Panamanian history and, of course, politics and what's going on. So all eyes will be on the elections on May 5th as this first past the post. Thank you so much to Carlos Guevara-Mann, Professor of Political Science, Director, Master of Science in International Affairs at Florida State University in the Republic of Panama, and President of the Sociedad Bolivariana de Panama. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this update on Panama.
Great to talk to you, Richard. Take care.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll be back in a fortnight discussing more issues from the region. I know you have enjoyed this. Please share and promote the Latin News Podcast. I've been Richard McCall in Bogota, Colombia. Thank you again, and bye-bye.